Hello, Guy. Electro pioneers.
Electro pioneers indeed, who very much modelled themselves on Kraftwerk, didn't they? But had a very innate pop sort of innocence about their sound, didn't they?
Yes, they did. And I'm just sort of, I'd love to know what the timeline is, because obviously there's a lot of bands that changed. I mean, in a way, they had the same philosophy as punk, right? It was a sort of DIY, but the instruments changed.
Yeah.
And, instead of the guitar, it was now whatever little synths or tapes they can get hold of. Obviously, Joy Division, there was all this stuff going on in Manchester. Then there's Liverpool, obviously, with these guys, OMD. But I think really, if I was going to say who was first, I'd say it was probably Human League.
Yeah, probably. But you're right. But even when we were talking to Midure, there was that thing of people suddenly realising that you could do all this stuff with a synth. I think it was when the first affordable little monophonics turned up.
Hello, this is our first album.
Yeah, that's you, right? Yeah.
Exactly, with the Blitz down there. So, obviously our big influences.
Would you have been playing them down the Blitz?
Actually, OMD's first single came out after the Blitz had moved on.
I thought it was 79, so.
Yeah, I think it just missed that. Human League was definitely being played. Being Boiled was definitely Mute Records, and Warm Leatherette. But obviously, there was a zeitgeist, and I know it was probably Kraftwerk and the German bands that we were all listening to. And of course, via Bowie, always, it's either the Beatles or Bowie, isn't it?
Yeah, it's true. And then, because I remember, I used to bump into them, or I don't know if Andy will remember, from, that there was that whole early 80s TV circuit that we were all on all over Europe. And it was just like, they were the people you saw everywhere.
Yeah, and of course we were all very competitive at the time, so we're turning our nose up at everything. But listening back to these albums, especially, that first album is so ahead of its time in many ways.
Yeah.
And would the Pet Shop Boys have ever existed if it hadn't have been for Souvenir?
I think you're absolutely right. That there's the big tip of the hat from the Pet Shop Boys, and fantastically, we've got our prog reference because produced by Mike Howlett.
Yeah, Gong.
Yeah.
Gong. I mean, do you know what I did?
More prog. But more prog.
But what I didn't know is Howlett played in the band with Sting and the Original Police.
That's right. Strontium 90 or something.
Strontium 90. Yeah. I don't know what their music is. I've no idea.
No, neither do I. No, that's a rabbit hole for us and our listeners to go down. Anyway, Andy McCluskey, let's get him on.
Welcome to the Rockonteurs.
Okay, guys, I'm ready.
That's a big tune for sure. I actually wrote that originally for Tina Turner.
Of course, I had gone and found Joni Mitchell down in Florida and brought her back.
I've listened to a few of them and they've been really good, man. I'm sitting in the back of the car coming into London. They're brilliant.
Thank you guys for still being around, still making music, still being into it, and doing this podcast. It's fabulous.
Well, I get the feeling that us three should go for a pint. That's what I think.
I'm in a band now. It's called Roxy Music.
You know this thing about the 10,000 hours of experience?
Oh, yeah.
Get good at something. When we recorded Arnold Lane, we'd done about 50 hours.
The Rockonteurs podcast with Gary Kemp and Guy Pratt.
Keep on rocking!
Whoa, hello.
Hello.
Andy.
Right. I can see but I can't hear you. What is this?
Oh, you're the techiest musician we've ever had on.
No, I'm the least techiest musician. Humphreys is the techie one. I've just had to disconnect my headphones, but I'll listen to you on audio. I've got this mic. I believe you want me to record myself on this.
Where are you, Andy? I'm Guy. We met several times back in the 80s on the TV circuit, but I doubt you'd remember.
Yes, hi, Guy.
Where are you coming from?
I'm up in Merseyside, on the other side of the river.
The Wirral.
The supposedly posh side.
You stayed loyal?
Yeah, the Wirral.
Or have you always been there?
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is actually, literally, if I go to the end of my garden and look down towards the Irish Sea, there's a gigantic pub in a place called Mel's. And I grew up behind this pub about 3 miles away, so I can see where I came from.
That's like Bruce Springsteen, isn't it? He said, I wrote Born to Run. I live 5 minutes from where I was born.
He hasn't gone very far.
So where did you guys meet? Do you remember meeting him? He always says that to people.
It was with
Ice House. When he was with Ice House.
TV shows around Europe. Yeah, but I think it might have been Paul, not you, who I met in. This is peak 80s, Gary. You'll love this. I think I met you in Crola, the clothes shop, and
Scott Crola.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, we decided to bin off the kind of boring bank clerk look. And Peter Saville, our designer, said, okay, if you really want to change your look, you've got to go to this shop, Scott Crowler. It's like, you know, clothes made out of your grease curtains. And we went from one extreme to the other.
I saw you in there and then bumped into you, I think, the next week at Top of the Pops. And you went, oh, hello, this is a far cry from the bright lights of Dover Street.
We should start by mentioning Dazzle Ships. Isn't that, you've got a 40th anniversary edition coming out, have you?
We have indeed, yes. I think it's out on the 31st of March. I mean, it's quite remarkable that actually 40 years after the event, we are celebrating an album that virtually destroyed our career. So it's how times change.
Pretty experimental, wasn't it, at the time?
Well, it didn't seem so to us because we... its blueprint, really, nothing's ever created in a vacuum. Its blueprint was Radioactivity by Kraftwerk, which had songs interspersed with little kind of audio snippets and bits of radio and stuff. So to us, it already made sense. But I think at the time, people found it
stands up really well. Stuff like the Radio Prague and things like that. It's gorgeous and it's incredibly sophisticated sounds because compared to the sort of sounds you had been using up to then. But I don't know if that's just access to equipment.
I think the biggest thing that changed was we got an emulator sampler. It was the first sampler we owned. So boom, everything changed. We were just throwing everything into the emulator, bits of radio and looping our own voices. And so it was. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when you're quite often keyboard based, every time you get a new synth or a new keyboard, suddenly opens up a whole Pandora's box of new sounds.
Yeah, it's funny. I was with someone yesterday who reminded me that around that sort of mid-80s time, he and I took a trip down to somewhere in Marylebone to view a Fairlight, and I was considering buying at ridiculous expense. I mean, people say 50 grand.
A Fairlight was a flat.
Yeah, but 50 grand now is a lot of money. I mean, you wouldn't dream of spending 50 grand on a piece of equipment now. People bought it then to get a 3-second sample. And I remember
originally monophonic.
Yeah, and I thought I should be considering it. This could be my future. We didn't. We carried on making the kind of music we'd established, if you like.
But we did buy a Fairlight, so
there you go. And you made Dazzle Ships.
It was after Dazzle Ships, actually, but the Fairlight was basically. I think we wanted a new toy, and we ended up having to. Somebody from Avid had to come to Montserrat Studios with us for 2 months. It was the best job of his life to operate them, show us how to use the Pro Tools.
No, because if you already had an emulator, the whole thing. I remember when the emulator came out, everyone was like, "Oh, thank God, mortals can get a sampler." It's for people who can't afford the Fairlight, really, wasn't it?
To my knowledge, I think the Fairlight came out
Fairlight was
just
first.
after the emulator.
Fairlight
it was really okay.
81.
Well, listen. I discovered 3 years ago when we did a 40th anniversary book that my memory is shot to hell, so I will bow to your knowledge on this.
Oh, well, this will be fun then.
Who am I?
Talking of memory, let me unload this, Gary. Sorry. I've had this pun stuck in my head for 43 years, and hopefully if I say it out loud to you, it'll finally go. It was something I read in NME, and I thought it was one of the funniest things I'd ever heard. And I can't remember what the context was, but it just said, the man who keeps hawks, who vacuums his flat at night, orchestral man hoovers in the dark.
I'm so glad that you managed to get that off your chest, guy. I've been carrying that one around for about 42 years, but at least you've now executed that demon.
Fantastic. What I think I was going to say before I was so rudely interrupted by a pun was the irony of getting to a stage in your career where you decide to spend 50 grand on a Fairlight, given that you began and the whole thrill of late 70s electronica was the simplicity of it, the tape machine, trying to get some electric circuit boards out of something to build us, in a way, and Guy and I were saying this earlier, those early days were like punk. It was just, except the instruments changed. It was still DIY.
You're absolutely true. You're absolutely right. I mean, when we first started, Paul had Paul basically made a noise machine out of cannibalized parts from his aunt's radios, and I had my bass, which the only one I could afford with my 16th birthday money was left-handed, so I played a left-handed bass, right-handed, and to this day, you'll know, I still play with the strings upside down on the right-handed bass. I couldn't go back once I'd learnt upside down, and it was just we were just.
That means your nuts all wrong.
Do you mind?
I have to have my nuts cut and adjusted, darling.
Well, yes. Well, we're all at that age, aren't we?
You have to cut the nut and flip it over, but. And of course, sometimes the E string jumps out of the nut when you hit it too hard. But other than that, which people who don't know what we're talking about, we go, "What are they on about now?" But no, but Gary, you're right. Paul and I had next to nothing when we started, and we were just making weird noises in the back room at his mum's house when she was working in the newsagents on a Saturday. And so, the irony of spending the same amount of money that my parents' house was valued at about 6 years later should not have been lost on us. But at the time it was.
Yeah. But when everyone looks back on what the classic OMD albums are, of course it becomes, it's the simplicity that we all fell in love with as well, isn't it, in those early days? The naivety of the sound.
Well, Paul and I basically taught ourselves to play by writing songs. And Electricity was the first actual song we wrote when we were 16 years old. So it was, it was very simple. I mean, I can't play keyboards. I wrote Enola Gay. The melody to Enola Gay was like, three-fingered claw hand on the chords, and the melody was played one finger at half speed. And I showed it to Paul and said, "That's it. Can you play it faster?" So it was really simple stuff.
Because Electricity, I saw you on a documentary where it's what one assumes is a sequencer is not. It's you playing and just moving the octave knob, right?
Oh, messages
as you go. That's messages. Sorry, messages.
Switching the octave.
This would go ding 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 ding.
And then it took us about 5 hours.
For 5 minutes,
It took us 5 hours to get a 5-minute take that didn't have a glitch in it where I was moving the knob. And then Paul went to play the keyboard and went, "Andy, it's not in G. Why is it not?" Pitch selector was turned all the way up, so the song is in G sharp because we're like, "Fuck it, we're not recording that again." We had to shift everything to G sharp.
So to learn all the chords with black notes.
Yeah, exactly. That was when Paul started using black notes.
So I'm sort of interested, really, because I'm interested in how, because obviously we ended up, getting into electronica. Our first album was coming through, the Blitz Club in London. At that time, Being Boiled had already been made because the Human League was one of the records that was being played in that club by Rusty Egan. You've got stuff happening. So Sheffield, obviously, and you've got Joy Division and Factory beginning. But what was your influence? I mean, where were you pre your first electronic outing? What was turning you on?
I think I was one of those teenagers in the mid-70s that wanted to find something different. So the music I liked was, and I talk to most people of our generation, and they'll go, "Yes, tick that box." Roxy Music, David Bowie, The Velvet Underground, Brian Eno, and that was, to me, everything.
Lots of sage nodding happening here for our listeners. Just to say, there's a lot of them.
Kraftwerk and Neu, and and to me, everything else was crap. That was all I wanted to listen to. And
so, not even an ounce of prog rock.
No. By the time I got to 15, I had decided that was completely self-indulgent twaddle, and I wasn't interested in it. So no, I looked like a prog rocker. I had the big afro, and Paul looked like Roger Hodgson out of Supertramp. I mean, when we first started in '78, we looked completely wrong. Peter Saville, the artist, said to us, "Your music sounds like the future, but God, you look like hippies. Get your bloody haircut."
So you encountered Peter Saville very early on then, it sounds like.
Yeah. We got into electronic music in 1975. Before we knew other English people were doing it. I would go to Liverpool with my money from my paper rounds. I would buy whatever was in the German import bin, take it back to Paul's house, because Paul had made a stereo because he was studying electronics and I only had a mono record.
Amazing.
So this was the symbiotic relationship we had. And we would listen to this stuff at Paul's house from 75 onwards. And when he finally got a Vox Jaguar organ and electric piano, we wrote Electricity in 1976 when we were both 16.
Wow.
And then we wanted to play, but we thought, well, even our mates thought what we were doing was rubbish. So we kind of modified it to play with our mates in a sort of rock version of ourselves called the Id, until 1978, when, as you say, we were in Eric's Club in Liverpool, and we had heard Being Boiled because we'd saw it in the end. There was no internet, so you only got your information from the music papers. We'd seen Being Boiled come out, we bought that, and then we were in Eric's Club in the summer of 78, and Warm Leatherette was played by the DJ. And we went, what the hell is that? And I went over to Norman, the DJ, said, what is it? He said, it's English, it's Mute Records, the normal. I just went to Paul, I said, right, that's it now. There is people in this country who have been into what we're into, and they're making records. We need to at least play a gig. And that's when we knocked on the door at Eric's Club and said, hi, Andy and Paul from Bandit Id. We did play here last in the summer. Could we do a gig on your open mic Thursday night? Just the two of us doing our electronic music. And he went, yeah, what are you called? And we went, oh, shit, we haven't got a name. We thought you'd tell us to bugger off. We'll get back to you on that. And then we went and invented Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark to do one gig.
No one invents Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark. I've never asked anyone where their name comes from, but I am intrigued now. Why?
Okay, well, let's go. The bottom line is we went back to my bedroom, and I used to use my wall as a sort of noteboard of ideas and things. And we were like, right, listen, there's two of us, we'll borrow...
Your mum must have been thrilled.
Yes, I would never allow such a thing with my children.
My bedroom was full of oil paint and Airfix models, and God knows, I had a tiny box room, 6x7 above the staircase.
Oh, yes.
But it was just... I looked on the wall and I said, Paul, listen, there's you and me, because nobody else wants to play with us. We'll borrow your mate's tape recorder. We'll do one gig. We need a name that people go, well, they're different. So we just looked on the wall and went, oh, yeah, I was going to write a song called Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark. I mean, this is how freaking pretentious I was. A song called Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark. It was going to be war recordings and interfering radios and things. And went, all right, yeah, well, that'll do. And so we went and told them the name. Listen, it could have been worse. Directly below Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark was something that we could have been called Margaret Thatcher's Afterbirth. That wouldn't have worked, would it?
That's a very different band. That's a Dead Kennedys type.
Yeah, throbbing whistle.
But were you, I take it you were going to the punk gigs, or were you just sitting at home listening to sort of the second side of Low or something? Or
listen, don't joke about that. Me, my mate John Floyd, and my first girlfriend Julia Neal used to go to his flat. He had no money. We had no money. By the time we'd taken the bus there, we'd get to his flat. We had no electricity, no gas, no heating, no food. But he'd lift the floorboard and he'd hot-wired his stereo into the light switch of the flat below. And as long as they kept the light on, we could listen to. And all we listened to was the second side of Low. It chimed with our frozen misery. Or the second side of Heroes, yeah. So it was exactly.
Second side of Heroes, yeah.
Well, I can't remember. That's life during wartime. I mean, that's an extraordinary level of, you tell young people today.
Exactly. So yeah, it was. We'd started our journey into kind of experimental electronic music before we heard other bands from the UK, and then we just went, oh wow, God, we better start doing this. And the thing was that basically we got together to do one concert, and the guys at Eric's Club said, oh, we've got a reciprocal relationship with this new club that's opened in Manchester called The Factory. So we went down there and supported Cabaret Voltaire.
Wow. And
we met this guy called Tony Wilson, who we knew as a TV presenter off the telly, the local news station. And so we then started doing gigs as Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark. But yeah, it was completely, it was a total accident. It was going to be a one-off, and then I was going to go to, what I was supposed to go and do was I was supposed to go to Leeds to do fine art. And I took a gap year, and that was the year that the band started. Had I gone to Leeds, do you know who was there on the same course I would have been on? Green Gartside from Scritty and Dave Ball and Mark Armand from Soft Cell. We all would have been doing art together in Leeds. It's amazing.
Do you, because a lot of your sound isn't just synthetic, it's also the sound of your bass guitar, which plays a very sort of melodic part. Can I ask, was that really this might be two things. It might be a direct influence of Peter Hook, or it's also the fact you've got your bass upside down, so your first strings are the very high ones.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't meet Hooky until until the end of '78 when we started when we played a gig with Joy Division, and then of course we got onto Factory Records, and we did several gigs with Joy Division. But no, my bass playing style came from one, not being very good, so it's mostly kind of just straight eights, just and
I was going to say it's very much bass playing what you do. It's unlike Hooky. It's
and yes, it's upside down, because playing upside down, it's a lot easier to do a split octave because you're reaching up instead of pulling down. Just think about it the other way around. I'm making that shape to go up rather than having to pull down. I know you can't even think about guitars with the strings.
So I really, I'd really like to go to the toilet now. I'll just leave you two bass players together. I'm not saying
it. I've got one left-handed story though. I'll tell you, which is that the guy.
You can't tell that.
My old tech was looking after.
It's not that one, is it? I've heard him tell that before.
My old tech Sid Price was looking after Paul McCartney, and once he said, "Come to the side of the stage at the end of a McCartney gig," and he went, "You got 5 minutes before I put it away," and he handed me the violin bass. Right, the one with the Candlestick Park set list on it. It was like, oh my god! But it's and obviously I'm playing it right-handed. I'm thinking, what can I do? And so I managed to work out Day Tripper upside down in a second. So yeah, so I have played Day Tripper upside, but it was a complete mind melt.
Can I just have a bit of a sidebar here about that roadie Sid Price? Because there's a funny story about his son, isn't there?
His son is called Tom, who now also works for McCartney, and Paul calls him Half Price.
Oh, very good, very good, very good. Yeah, it's no. I mean, you could do that because you're a real bass player. I never got more than just a sort of. I play bass as a tuned percussion instrument. Basically.
No, mate, but you play and you sing. You play and you sing, which is the hardest gig in the world. It is.
Well, and I dance weird as well. Try and do all three of those.
Boy, do you? Because it's brilliant. Because you wrote the book, mate, didn't you?
I don't know. There's something. No, I don't know. I know the style of dancer you're talking about. I think anyone who knows you.
Stuart McConey famously called it the trainee teacher dance.
Yeah, I prefer epileptic windmill.
But the thing is, and that wasn't uncommon, that dance. When I first went to the Billies and I saw electronica for the first time, as it were, there was a sort of slow jive that was going on the dance floor. And people did adopt this kind of, I don't know where this zeitgeist comes from, do you? You don't know why is it that everyone seems to be doing the same across the country. But
Morphic Resonance.
Morphic Resonance. I never heard of them. Resonance. Did they bring out an album?
It's actually was the next one on the list for your band name, wasn't it?
It's definitely better than.
I think there was a thing of just wanting not to be disco. Not wanting to be Saturday Night Fever.
Even Rod Stewart
exactly.
Not be disco until he went disco.
Nobody wants to be for disco until they go disco.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you were expressing that you were making a form of dance music, and it wasn't an intellectual exercise.
Part of me, I think, I was aware that there was only two of us on tape recorder. Paul was static, and a lot of people, their attitude was, electronic music is conceptual and intellectual. You can't dance to it. And I wanted to prove that you could. I mean, as Paul says, I've spent 44 years overcompensating for his static performance, but it is what it is.
Let's talk about Winston.
Oh yes, the tape recorder.
I mean, Winston was very, everyone, it was in all the interviews when you first started off this tape recorder. Does Winston still exist?
Yes, Winston is actually in the Museum of Liverpool behind glass, which makes me feel very old.
You should explain what it is.
Winston, the tape recorder, was owned by Paul Humphreys' mate, Paul Collister, who created a studio in his garage.
So he became your manager, right?
He became, well, of course he became our manager because A, he had a studio, B, he had tape recorders, and C, he worked for Vision Hire, so he had a van. I mean, he ticked all the boxes for an early manager, didn't he?
Vision Hire.
That's how you become a manager. So we ended up basically we put a load of backing tracks onto Winston, the tape recorder, because none of our mates wanted to play with us. And we went and started playing gigs with Winston sat there in the middle, where the drummer would be, on a plinth with his reels going around. Because this is the time when, synthesizer music was starting to come out of the box. The Musicians Union did not like synthesizers. They thought it was taking jobs from real musicians, that you could have a string section or synth. So they made these stickers, big yellow stickers were saying "Keep Music Live." So we stuck them on the spools of Winston, so they'd go "Keep Music Live" going round and round on the tape reels.
Fantastic.
But hang on, you're saying none of your mates would play with you? That sounds a bit.
No, well, they just thought that what we were doing was, they were into Genesis and the Eagles and Pink Floyd, and we were into Kraftwerk and Neu and Brian Eno, and they just didn't get it.
No. I guess the how my memory works with this one, Human League also had a tape recorder at the back. Was that your inspiration, or was you the first?
No, I mean, for us it was just an element of practicality. I mean, apparently there's supposed to have been a 40-year feud between me and Phil Oakey about who came first and who was inspired by what. And you know what? I didn't meet Phil Oakey in person until about 4 years ago. Well, and I went right up to him and said, "Phil, apparently we hate each other. How are you, mate?"
He went, "Fuck off."
I think the thing was, there's no disputing the Human League made a record before we did. Yeah. And hearing Being Boiled, Paul and I went, "Shit, we've been sitting in your mother's back room for 2 years. We need to go and play a gig and do something, because now other people have actually gone ahead of us." So Human League's making Being Boiled made us go, right, we're going to be a band. But we had written Electricity 2 years before that. Electricity came out as a single, and then what I think people say is, yeah, they started before you, but you had hits before them, so Phil was pissed off. And I don't really think that was the case. But there's such a fine line. It's like the history of punk, and who started first, who inspired who. Now we played that club 2 days before you did. We're the authentic,
Yeah. But that's the thing, isn't it? As you get older and time changes, you forget that like just how quickly everything was moving when you're young. It's like you say, it's literally a matter of days between events. Yeah. Now it's years, 10 years.
But it is at our age. It takes me years.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
But we want to see stone epitaphs laid there, don't we? Saying, "Here this week, a band played with a tape recorder."
What happened was, after the second gig where we went to the Factory Club and we met Tony Wilson, he used to have bands on Granada Reports. We met him. We met him at his club. Why don't we send him? So we sent a cassette to say, "Can we get on the telly?" We didn't even know he was starting Factory Records. Now, we heard that there was an apocryphal story, and we thought that was all it was, apocryphal. 4 years ago, we met his first wife, called Lindsay Reed, and we said, "Is there any truth in the story about the shopping bag in the car?" She went, "Oh, no, it's true. I got in the car, Tony picked me up, and there was a plastic shopping bag full of cassettes sitting in the footwell." And she went, "All right, love, what's with the cassettes?" "I'm taking them to the tip. They're reject cassettes of people who wanted to get on the TV or on the new label." She put her hand in the bag, pulled out a cassette and went, "Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, that's a weird name." And he went, "Oh, they played the club last week, shit. Hairy Scousers with electronic music, not authentic, not rock." She put it on, it was Electricity. And she went, "That's a hit, love." And he went, No, that's a hit. So apparently he taps her patronising on the thigh and goes, "All right, darling, I'll sign them for you." And that is how you get a record deal. You're pulled out of the bag on the way to the tip. It's a true story.
Wow. That's
if that bag had literally landed differently in the footwell, it would have been another cassette.
But
what year was it? What year was this? What month did Electricity? I'm trying to ask this question.
That was. Gary's determined to get a definitive timeline here.
I am, because cut a long story short is coming up.
There we go. We sent that tape to Tony Wilson in November 78.
Wow. Bravo.
And the factory released the electricity in April 79.
What is interesting is the fact that, because we now know in retrospect that, like, Joy Division were totally into this whole krautrock thing as well. So, but no one knows that anyone else is into it.
You can tell by their drumming, most of all. I always.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Stephen Morrison's drumming is unbelievable. Yeah, and very distinctive drumming. And so then we get on Factory Records and we're doing all these concerts with Joy Division, and me and Ian Curtis are looking at each other going, "You dance like me, and I dance like you." That's weird.
Of course, of course.
But yeah, so we did quite a few gigs with Joy Division.
How was Ian at that period? How did you get on with him? Or was there a sense of?
They just seem to be a bunch of down to earth guys who, they made this strange music. I mean, first of all, you got to remember we started playing with them before Martin Hannett produced their first album. Right. Hannett took a slightly more punky, rough band and imposed his vision on them that turned them into the Joy Division that were recorded. And when they first heard his mixes of the first album, Unknown Pleasures, he had distilled it down to the primary colours that he thought it should be, which was the drums and the bass and the vocals, and he put on his guitar through effects out, left and right. And it was Hannett's vision more than Joy Division's vision. I think initially they were more punky than he turned them into something that they became. And I think that they didn't like the mix to begin with, but everybody else went, "Oh my God, this is the new vision. This is the new." And then they adopted it.
Yeah, because Hannett's such an extraordinary character, isn't he? I mean, obviously, you working with him yourself. I mean,
yeah, he did an amazing job on Almost, which was the B-side of Electricity. He didn't like what he did to the A-side. He made it too washy. But I mean, the first time we were ever in a real recording studio, we were in Strawberry in Stockport, and it was, what small labels used to take downtime, so you had an overnight session. Yeah. Did you ever do those?
Yeah,
and you were working from like midnight till 10 a.m. before the next day's session came in. And so sometime around about 4 a.m, Hannett, who was stoned off his tree, just climbed under the desk and fell asleep. And Paul and I were like, "Will you wake him up?" "No, you wake him up. What are we going to do?" Wait till he woke up.
Yeah. Was he on Camembert Electrique, Guy? Do you know? Was he? Did he?
What?
Was he on? Was it Gong?
No, you're thinking
Howlett.
Hannett, not Howlett.
Mike Howlett was the bass player in Gong. Yeah.
Gong, yes.
He by default became our producer because he was the boyfriend of Carol Wilson, who was the head of Indus Records, the label that signed us.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm not always an expert, I get some things get
No, listen, I've listened to some of your podcasts and some of your knowledge, Gary, particularly from the late 70s, is frightening. The one that you did with Paul Simonon was like, whoa. You were pulling out references.
But Guy and I lived and breathed that,
Yeah.
I also didn't expect your conversation with Paul Simonon turned up with Gustav Metzger. I'm like, well, I know him. How did that come from that conversation?
Oh, yeah.
For those who don't know, kind of auto-destructive art.
That's right, yes.
One of the most amazing things about that first album is the cover. We've got to say that. I know that's not what musicians want to hear, but let's face it, that Savile cover was, with the die-cast and the colours and everything about it were quite beautiful.
Listen,
very craft work, I have to say.
You can say it. 50% of the records were sold because people were buying the cover. So absolutely, it was genius. Obviously, just like Joy Division's 12-inch single, the manufacturing costs of it. Do you remember the days of
the old school yard?
Yeah. What was it called? It was 2 words that put fear into all musicians: packaging deduction.
Packaging deductions. Yes.
Yeah. That the cost of cutting those die cuts just crippled us with earning money.
Yeah, I tell you a funny story. In the years later, when streaming happened and that was all people were doing, we realised we were still being charged packaging deduction by the record company.
So were we? Yeah, I know.
Which we've since sorted out, but they carried that. Those people carried that on.
Listen.
Well, why wouldn't they?
Nobody ever ever audited their record company and found out that the record company had accidentally overpaid the artist.
Yeah.
Every excuse to screw you, you know?
Yeah. One thing I'd like to ask about, Andy, is the inspiration for your songwriting lyrically, because you like big historical themes often, didn't you? And I mean, do you like especially? I mean, with the fullness of time, obviously the sentiment of writing a clearly big anti-war song, but actually managing to write quite a jaunty pop song about possibly the most heinous war crime of all time. How did you feel about that at the time?
Right behind me, see there? See the photographs behind me? That's the crew of the Enola Gay. They're signed photographs of the crew of the Enola Gay.
Signed? Wow.
Signed by the crew, yeah. Because Paul and I started the band accidentally, we therefore had carte blanche in terms of what we were going to do musically and lyrically. And I desperately did not want to write what I considered to be cliched lyrics. I wanted to write about things that I was interested in, or if I'm going to express love, and the world survives on love, that's what makes the world go round. Don't do it in a cliched way. Do it in a way that is you trying to express your own feelings, and often with metaphors that are not the usual metaphors. So, but yeah, you're right. I mean, I would write about, I was fascinated by warfare, not because I believe it's a beautiful and wonderful thing, because I'm fascinated by how moral standards are completely turned 180 on their head. Things, you're encouraged to do things at times of warfare that you get arrested for in times of peace. And so if you're interested, as I've already said, I had all the Airfix models. I was a geek. Paul was a train collector. I was an Airfix collector. If you're interested in airplanes and warfare, you invariably come to Enola Gay, which is the name of the airplane, the atom bomb on Hiroshima.
Yeah, I had the FX B-29 Super Fortress, yeah.
You had one? I never made one.
It was Revel. No, it was Revel. It was Revel. I think Revel did the B-29. I think.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, maybe that's why I didn't get it, because the shop I went to didn't have them. They only
had Airfix.
Anyway, let's not go down that wormhole.
You know what I think it is to a large extent?
Gary, you can tell he's excited. He just knocked his microphone over.
That's not his microphone.
Now he's
Don't stop me on the Schwimmwagen.
No, listen. I think that we were the first generation not to be conscripted, to not have to face proper war. So we had this piece to make a judgment from. But at the same time, the TV was full of war films, documentaries, World at War. We were constantly seeing these black and white. And of course they were black and white. They didn't even look like today. They look like some mythological past images. And I think we wanted to put ourselves on a bigger heroic landscape as our fathers stood on. And I think that tended to be the kind of lyrics everyone wanted to write about,
I think Gary's point is very salient, though. I mean, all of our parents had memories of the war and recollections of their lives would have been totally dominated by the war. And, the centre of Liverpool and Birkenhead, and I'm sure London, there were still places that were vacant lots where bombs had dropped and nothing.
Where I played.
Oh, yeah, prefabs. All my mates lived in prefabs. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah. So yes, but then you're also right that, in the 1980s, we were still very much in the Cold War. I was sampling the shortwave radios for the Dazzle Ships album and putting them in. I mean, I can actually recall we did ask the Voice of America if we could use their call sign. And they said, no, we've listened to your album. It's communist propaganda, because most of the radio stations in Europe were communist stations. So they said, unless you put on, a balance of pieces from, I think they called it democratic stations, but capitalist stations, basically, against the communist stations, that we can't use our signal. But it was the thing. Going back to Enola Gay, I was, to the day he died, Paul Tibbets, the pilot, believed he did the right thing. He killed 150,000 people with one bomb, believing he saved 5 million. And that is a moral dilemma that he was certain he made the right decision over. So certain that he named the aeroplane after his lovely mother.
Do we know what she thought about that?
She was probably very proud. She probably thought he'd done the right thing. I mean, that's why there's a line in the song, is mother proud of little boy today, which has about 4 meanings, because the bomb was...
Yeah, of course, the bomb was little boy, yeah. Oh, that's the bit I always got. I was just the bomb reference. So
I just want to talk about your influence upon other people now, really, because, you know, when you listen to Souvenir, it's the Pet Shop Boys' entire career.
Yeah.
Right? and I don't think that... and I'm sure that they would admit to that influence. But does it get you a little bit that sometimes when you're pushing that door open, it's easier for other people to go through?
Do you know what?
Or you've sold so many records, it doesn't really matter.
At the time, you know, you do get fed up and pissed off, and you think, God, you know, we've been doing this for how many years? And then somebody else, I mean, the weirdest thing was, you know, the Human League were a bit like, where did you come from? And then all of us went to Gary Newman, where the hell did you come from? And he had 2 number 1s in 79.
Yeah,
you know,
I remember Gary Newman turning up at the Blitz Club and no one talking to him. He's too commercial. He's commercializing the whole thing.
Yeah, so, you know, that was. It goes back to these fine lines, you know, you did this 2 days before us. But it was just, I don't know. I think I can remember doing an interview. You must have done photographs with Eric Watson.
Yeah, lots. Yeah, he did one of our famous album sleeps. He was like a
So we were doing a smash hit. And there's 2 things I remember about that. One, Neil wanted to interview us separately, so I was wandering around the studio and I went to this light box and I switched it on. And I was looking at these photographs and I said to Eric, oh, she's cute. Who's that? And he went, oh, some dancer from New York who thinks she can sing. It's Madonna. Just before she was world famous. And the other thing was, Neil, when we parted, Neil said, well, this is probably one of my last interviews for Smash Hits because I've got my own band and I'm releasing a record soon. And, you know, you hear it all the time, and we just went, oh, well, you know, good luck with that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, of course, he released West End Girls a month later, and boom.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. Oh, it's a Sin, I think, was their first, wasn't it? I think, probably. I don't know. We should get...
No, it was actually the one about Let's Make Lots of Money. That was actually the first one.
Yeah.
Was it? Yeah. But it's funny how these things happen. I mean, you know, it's weird. Talking about circles... We were in Eric since the summer of 78 when we heard Warm Leatherette on Mute Records.
Yeah.
That inspired us to create the band. Then 7 months later, 6 months later, we released Electricity on Factory Records. These guys in a club in Basildon hear it and go, right, let's bin the guitars and let's get synths. And I know this is true because Vince told me it's true. And what do? They started Depeche Mode. And who do they sign to? Mute Records. Complete the circle.
Yeah. Daniel Miller was Mute Records. What do we know about Daniel? Because he was definitely an incredible pioneer, wasn't he?
Oh, he absolutely was. Well, I mean, as well as the Normals first, the single Warm Leatherette TVOD, which is seminal. I mean, people talk about, you know, Human League, OMD, Pet Shop Boys, Depeche Mode. To me, that's the one. That's the one that was the seminal track that changed the world. But yeah, because Mute Records, really, I mean, Daniel then really kind of largely gave up writing and just collected the most incredible group of artists on his label. I think the Comatines. You remember the Comatines? He was the Comatines as well.
Did you meet?
Long distance information.
Oh.
Yeah. Because in a way, that sums it up. It was it was garage meets bubblegum meets electronica, wasn't it? Really?
Yeah.
Did you meet him?
Doing electronic garage cover versions of Chuck Berry and pretending to be 4 teenagers, but it was Daniel Miller.
Because you had a problem with Souvenir as a song for quite a while, did you not, Andy?
Yeah, Enola Gay was the first song that Paul and I wrote, not as a duo. I wrote it on my own. Mm-hmm. Because he kept turning down jobs from the Dole office, and they finally just went, right, you can't turn this job down. You've got to go on hod carry down at the rebuilding of the local baths, or you're not getting your Dole money. So he wasn't at home that week, and I wrote Enola Gay. Next album comes out. The first song he writes on his own, pretty much, is Souvenir. And in the same way that, he had to adopt somebody else's baby in Enola Gay, I had to learn to adopt Souvenir and learn to love it. And to begin with, I thought it was drippy and wet. And I kept trying to put punk bass lines onto it and riff it off a bit and change it, which was of course, totally inappropriate. 6 months later, when I've kind of got over myself, I just like, God, this is gorgeous, romantic, dreamy stuff. Why did I hate it so much? But it wasn't my baby.
Who produced the record?
Mike Howlett.
He did that one because it's
a studio creation, isn't it? He did that thing like the old 10cc thing with the vocals. He did that thing with the synth, didn't he? Where he was basically playing it on the desk. He was playing it on the mixing desk.
A guy called Dave Hughes, who had been played keyboards for us on our first tour before Martin Cooper joined the band. He'd been recording a local choir, and he came into Paul and said, "I've got these tapes, these 1/4-inch tapes of this choir warming up, singing certain notes. I want to make loops out of them, so we'd make our own mellotron." And so they made these tape loops where they literally with pencils and Revots and several pencils around the room, they made a loop and sort of round. And Paul and Dave played onto the 2-inch tape about 6 or 7 different notes of this small choir tuning up, and of course, because they're tape looping and the tape is tightening, and so it's kind of like it's fluctuating and wobbling, so it's got this kind of really weird eeriness to it. And then Paul just made the song up to literally just pushing the notes up, going and he just made this sequence and then wrote the song on top of it. But that's how we made records. We did everything you're not supposed to do. And the bass drum on Souvenir is a rotom.
Outrageous.
Yes, we just. But I think that was the good thing, is that Mike Howlett actually kind of let us do what we wanted to do. He was just there to try to make sure that it sonically was recorded well. Because our first album that we did ourselves in our own studio really sounds like garage synth band, because we had no clue what we were doing. We just thought they're going to give us 30 grand and then we're going to get dropped because nobody's going to buy our records. So let's build a studio. So we built our own studio and recorded ourselves. And amazingly, the first album went gold. So
did Howlett produce all of Architecture and Morality?
Howlett produced Enola Gay and the second album that Enola Gay came off, and Messages, our first single. We re-recorded Messages, and that became our first hit off the first album. But we decided that we wanted to be on our own again. So when we got into the studio for the third album, Architecture and Morality, we just did it with Richard Mannering, who was the
you're up in the Manor, weren't you, in Oxford?
Yeah, and Richard Mannering was the house engineer at the Manor. So we liked working with him. When
Mannering of the Manor.
Mannering of the Manor, yes.
Mannering of the Manor.
It sounds very, very, very
Did you ever work up there, Guy? It was a fantastic.
The Manor.
Richard Branson.
It's fantastic. So what I felt really weird was that so much of it is Manor and so little of it is recording studio.
The barn, basically.
You know what I mean? It's just this little studio tacked onto this big house.
So it became about because of Tubular Bells, didn't it? Didn't Mike Oldfield record there originally?
I think that Richard Branson created the studio for Mike Oldfield to do basically Tubular Bells created Virgin Records.
Yeah.
That basically just blew the wheels off things, and Virgin went mega after Tubular Bells. Yeah, that's where Oldfield recorded Tubular Bells.
No one ever talks about Tubular Bells.
You guys must have been working class boys. Did you not find it really weird going to a big Oxford country manor with a full-sized billiard table and fireplaces and Irish wolfhounds, and just feel like, I shouldn't be here? What am I doing here? I'm an imposter.
No, mate. No. We were aspirational working class guys. That was
okay.
I used to find that about studio. Any studio, the first studios I went into were just another plane of existence. Just the fact that someone offers you a cup of coffee is like.
I actually quite liked having pool tables and that around, because at least, you know, some people in the band could just wander off there instead of deciding to chip in too many ideas.
There speaks a songwriter. Why don't you go fucking play pool? Don't tell me what to do with my song.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, when you went on to Dazzle Ships, you used... It's interesting listening to Dazzle Ships, and I know this is where we began the interview, but it's not what you'd say is a Rhett Davis album, is it? You know, Rhett has...
Yeah.
I mean, his production with Roxy Music, you know, it's what we know as being... You know,
he's the man he changed my life. He's the man who changed my life. He produced Ice House. He produced Ice House. Yeah. And because Ivor was so much like Brian Ferry, it's like the label were either going, okay, if he's going to do Brian, then let's do it properly. Or it was like, let's get him off this Brian thing and get Brian's producer in, so he'll just go, oh, come off it. But what happened was that Rhett just said, you know what, you're perfect for Brian, and stole me.
Is that right?
Well, there you go.
Yeah. And that's what I did, which is where I met David Gilmour, which is where I met Pat Leonard. It literally changed my whole life. So Rhett Davis changed
I
my
thought
whole
meeting
life.
me changed your life.
Well, it did, but in other ways.
but going back to our guest guy.
Yes.
You know,
sorry, who is it?
Yeah. You know,
sorry, Andy.
I'm just saying, Rhett Davis and
I was a huge Roxy Music fan in the 70s. Took me a little while to adjust to the smoother sound that they had in the 80s. But once we got into it, we were like, okay, so who's made this record? Rhett
Beautiful
Davis.
sounding.
Right, let's get him. But yeah, Rhett Davis must have gone, why the hell have you got me in to mix an album that's got loads of radio samples and speak and spell? And, you know, when I'm making smooth rock with Bob Clearmountain mixing it, Bob Clearmountain ain't going to mix, you know, speaking clocks from around the world and make it sound any different. So, yeah, Rhett, I remember what we paid Rhett. My God, that was a lot of money.
But that may have added to it. But what was the creative friction like?
Do you know what? I don't recall creative friction, actually. What I did like was that we did go and do some recordings in Phil Manzanera's studio.
Oh, the round one down in Richmond.
Round white building.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember, because, you know, at that time I was like 23, 24, and I lived and breathed music every second of every day. Mm-hmm. And I was saying to Phil, I said, it's really kind of you to let us use your studio. Are you, but you're not on tour. You're not using it. He said, no, I only go in there once or twice a week, you know. So what do you rest the time? He said, well, I go to London for lunch or talk to the accountant. So I was just like, if I had a studio at my house, I wouldn't let anyone else in there really all the time. I was like, what a different world he's from. How did that happen? You know,
he's got a huge studio in his house now. It's huge.
Yeah.
It is his house, in fact.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, he lives in his studio. Well, he doesn't. That's his London place. But yeah, it's fabulous.
But it was amazing. No, it's strange.
But did you find Rhett? Did Rhett contribute to your creative process? Did you find anyway?
No, Rhett was just trying to get the record that was full of weird shit to sound as professional as possible, struggling through the stuff we were giving him, and he did. He made it sound pretty good, given the weird stuff that we were trying to do.
Well, also because the title comes from talking about, you know, listen, I'm as pretentious as the next pretentious man, but you know, Dazzle Ships being that painting by it's Edward Wadsworth, isn't it? It's 1919 sort of vorticist, because he invented camouflage, and he came back to our war thing.
Oh right.
Basically, yeah. Essentially, in the First World War, these artists went to the Ministry of Warfare or whatever and said, we've got an idea, and it's utterly counterintuitive. Instead of painting ships grey to make them fade into the darkness of the grey sky and the grey Atlantic or whatever, why don't you paint them in fractured stripes and different colours so that the U-boats through their periscopes can't work out how big they are, how far away they are, and which direction they're going in? And it's you know, why don't you paint an elephant pink so it's harder to fire at? You know, it's totally counterintuitive. But 2,500 ships were painted in these bonkers stripes. And I had never heard of it until Peter Saville came to me and said, I have seen this painting by Wadsworth, Dazzle Ships in Liverpool Dry Dock. I want to do a Vorticist sleeve. Can you call the album Dazzle Ships and write a song called Dazzle Ships? The tail was wagging the dog, and I went for it hook, line, and sinker.
We went to a car museum with Nick Mason, didn't we, Guy, on the last tour in America? And there's a car there that's painted
right,
in this
Porsche,
bizarre black and white stripes. I didn't understand what it was. It made your eyes go funny. And it was apparently to stop people taking photographs of it or
when they're
filming
test driving it on tracks.
Yeah.
So, or it's more so if you do photograph it, you can't get a clear idea of what the design is.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, yeah, I mean, it's. I don't think they could ever prove that it worked or it didn't work, but they did it to a lesser degree in the Second World War. But yeah, it was
they went to the Ministry of Defence and said, we've got this mad idea, and in 80 years' time, everyone in nightclubs is going to be wearing stuff that looks like this.
Listen, you see it. Listen, there's G-Shock watches that came out in Dazzle stripes. There's all sorts of strange things that.
It's like the jazz age.
It seemed an appropriate thing to do at the time. The third album had been massive, and we were just doing what we wanted to. I mean, Souvenir and Maid of Orleans and Joan of Arc didn't sound like Enola Gay. We just changed direction again, and this time, 40 years ago, the record buying public went, no thanks. You're more than 15 minutes ahead of the fashion, as Warhol would have said.
Oh yeah, Maid of Orleans and Joan of Arc.
Yeah, discuss.
Yeah.
Well, I wrote Maid of Orleans first, and I didn't think it was working. Paul fished out the demo a few years ago, and now I know why I didn't think it was working, because it was bloody awful. But when we were packing up to go down to the Manor, Malcolm Holmes, our drummer, said, are we doing that other? Because I wrote another Joan of Arc because I was determined I wanted to write a song called Joan of Arc. So I wrote Joan of Arc, not Maid of Orleans. And Mal said, are we doing the waltz one? I said, no, I've got another one. He said, no, let me play drums on it. I'll make it a hit. So I let him play drums on it, and it was a hit. We released, I think the record company thought that the waltz version was going to be the bigger hit. They needed to take time for Let Souvenir to fall out of the charts in Europe, because the European charts went more slowly than the British charts. So we needed to release something in between for the UK. So they went, well, why don't we release Joan of Arc? So okay, that got to number 5. And then they said, right, now we're going to go with the other Joan of Arc, but you can't call it that. And I went, oh, no. This is brilliant. You've fallen into my trap now. We're going to release 2 consecutive songs that are different songs, but the same name. That's really going to mess the music industry up, isn't it? And we argued and argued. We said, no, Andy, you can't. People will think they've already bought it. No, but that's the whole point. We're going to screw the industry, but you're going to screw yourselves. I was so determined to fight the machine, In the end, I succumbed to having my arm twisted, and it was Maid of Orleans, the waltz joke. But yeah,
we actually have to wrap up today a little bit,
which is really, really annoying. But this is actually my fault because I scheduled it later because I had an appointment. So this is all my fault. I'm really sorry.
Well, listen,
it's great talking to you, Andy.
It's so great to talk to other musicians. And thank you for doing your research and knowing your history. And it's, we could have gone on forever and ever. We could have talked about more of your stuff. And I just...
Well, maybe we'll do another one.
And I know that, Gary and I have met once or twice. I remember you were talking to Steve Harley at the Ivor Novello's years ago. And I walked up and said, I'm really sorry to interrupt. Just want to say, Steve, I have a scrapbook of yours. I was a huge fan of what I was talking. Steve Harley looked at me like, fucking weirdo. And walked off. I subsequently got him to sign my scrapbook, and he did believe me. But
we'll have to get Steve on because we're all big fans.
That's not very krautrock.
So listen, guys, thank you so much.
Are you going out on the road? Just want to say, are you going out on the road? Anything coming? Any shows coming up?
We got festivals all summer, and next year we are talking of krautrock. We are releasing what is probably going to be our final OMD studio album that was written in this room because I was bored off my brains by COVID, the creative power of boredom once again, and it's called Bauhaus Staircase.
Come on, what a title. Love it. Still got it.
Thank you, Andy. All the best.
Bye, guys. Thank you so much.
We're going to wrap up here fast because our lovely producer Ben Jones has to leave.
Ben's got to go.
So thank you to Ben, and Thank you to everyone.
Thank you to everyone. We could have gone on for ages. Maybe we should get him back. I don't know. It was great.
Yeah. All right. Good night from me.
And good night from them.
Rockonteurs is produced by Gimme Sugar Productions for Warner Music Group UK.